So I'm Brock, and this is the group, Tanner, Jacob, Rob, and Bryant, and we worked with the BYU Intramural office for our futures process presentation. And you all know these shirts, you've all seen these shirts. They are highly coveted shirts among those who are familiar with BYU Intramurals because it means you were the best. But as we know, not everyone gets them, but lots of people try to get them. And during this process, as we look at playing intramural sports, it's pretty easy to kind of see that there are a couple people involved, right? There's the intramural office, the staff, they officiate. They are the generic beneficiary in that we pay them and they provide us a service. And then we have the students who are the specific beneficiaries who get the opportunity to come and play sport. But when you look at students, you see, current intramural processes are, as we examine these processes, we're going to see that they're kind of a little bit wasteful of time. Sometimes they're complicated and they're a little inflexible for students as they are trying to go through all the steps they need to go through to play intramural sports. And part of the vision of the intramural office is that they provide programming for not just the athletic minority of BYU students, but the majority. So as we spoke about, those things we said earlier, the rigidness of the process, the wastefulness, the complicatedness of it, we can kind of see that in making the process complicated, it's already making it difficult for some of the students, but there's also the fact that the majority of students includes freshmen, solo players, and transfer students, all of whom might not be familiar with the system. Just personal experience. I have a little sister, she's a freshman, she played soccer in high school, she loves playing soccer. She got offers to play at probably 6 different colleges, and she opted to come to BYU thinking, well, if I can't play competitively in college, I will at least go to BYU where I'll be able to play intramurals. And she would not have been able to take advantage of this program had I not found someone for her to play with. She did not have any friends come here, she did not know anyone when she came here. I happened to know someone who had a team of girls, and I said, hey, I have a sister, and that's the only way she was able to play. But if she'd had to fend for herself, she would not have been able to play. She would not have been able to take advantage of the service that the intramural office offers, and her needs would have been unmet. So we're going to focus on the process of intramurals. We're going to focus on enhancing it, eliminating some of the waste from the process by reducing the complicatedness, and also enabling people like my little sister or solo players, transfer students who come to BYU to be able to play on their own.
So today what we're going to do to address this is talk about both the schedule, obtaining a schedule process, as well as playing intramurals. So I'm going to walk you through a little PCN diagram here. We're going to be like a student who's desiring to play sports. So walking through, you desire to play sports, you have to gather information on this website right here. You wait to sign up, then you're given an appointment time online. You make that time, which is a first come, first serve. You wait for that appointment, which could end up being on like a snowy day or whatever day, and then you have to travel down to the intramural office. Walk down to the RB. We've all seen this sign right here. So you're going to walk down, you're going to wait to look at schedules. You're checked in by a supervisor outside of the office right here. You're in a long line of busy students, of schedules, and there's a long stack. You'll see these stacks such as this. This is an example of what a schedule looks like. You'll choose one, fill out the top half, and then you'll be checked out by a supervisor. So, and then you can travel home. So this is the process of obtaining a schedule. You'll notice here a lot of pain points. All the red, we're seeing the negative value proposition of waiting for appointments, having to travel, and actually viewing the schedules we've seen. Now, you'll notice some of the green smiley faces of value, but what we want to explain is that this is only value potential, not necessarily value realization, because realization is actually playing the sport. So, to address more of these process pain points, we realized first that this is not a customizable process. You'll notice that all of the planning is done in independent processing. As well as this is a complicated process. You saw all of the red and all of the steps that were needed in order to obtain a schedule. So we wanted to address those two issues. Let's talk a little bit about planning the activities and the season schedules. So how it's currently done is the intramural office does both in the independent processing region, where they just decide schedules for us and the activities. This gives us better economies of scale, however, less customization. The students don't have any say. Another option we could do is provide a survey to put it into the provider-surrogate interaction, where they're planning the schedules based on student feedback, which is something that we thought would be beneficial. Another thing is we could do, in the direct interaction, we could plan season schedules with the intramural office, but imagine the whole student body and the whole intramural office coming together. That's terrible efficiency, and I honestly wouldn't be able to see that being done. We could also plan our own schedules and just use the intramural office's facilities, or we could be like my favorite team here in the Sandlot, have our customers independent processing. We can go play a baseball game whenever we want. However, if we want, like I said, that's more customization, but there's no economies of scale, and if we want to have tournaments or t-shirts or any organization, that's going to be difficult. The other thing we decided to do was to look at servitization. Now, in class, we learned that servitization, in order to provide more value to the customer, is moving items from independent processing more towards interactive processes, so moving them to a different domain. So you'll notice in our current PCN diagram, the levels that are in independent processing, all the yellow that I just showed you. So we decided, let's take plan activities and plan season schedules, like we talked about in our analysis, and move it over here to surrogate interaction. So how we're going to get that done, a possible solution is to do what we suggested and provide the survey. So you would post a feedback survey, the students would fill it out, and then we would plan not we, but the intramural office would plan the activities based on consumer feedback. And then the customers would then be given a schedule that would be based off of their own feedback, which they could either agree to or could wait for their normal regular sign-up. So you'll notice the surrogate positioning that's now available in this process. Now, some possible pitfalls that we understand with servitization is it's not as profitable. We understand that it's going to require more work for the intramural office because they don't have as much expertise in designing a survey, designing a website, and we understand those things are happening, but we know that it will provide value for the customer.
Perfect. Now the question is, what happens if the person decides to not accept the schedule they received from the intramural office, or they do not want to go through the survey process? So let's create an analogy so you can understand a bit more. So this pictures represent a class registration in the 1980s. And then you can see there's a huge line. So the way it works is you have a piece of paper for your classes, you will get in line, and then you will wait in line to meet the professor. He will stamp your paper, and that will show that you were registered for that class. After you're done, you will go back to another line for a second class and start all over again. As you can see, it's very time consuming. Today, how it looks like right now is just a website. You have a class registration, you select your class, and register for your class. Pretty simple, and you don't have more of this time-consuming waiting anymore. So this is the PCN diagram that Tanner went through of how it looks like today for the students. As you can see, the only two things we need to register for a class or for intramurals is to view a schedule and choose a schedule. All the rest is waste. So we need to eliminate those wastes because they're not important for the student, and that will make our process more lean. So let's choose one of those. Let's just choose schedule, and let's go through the PCN analysis. So if we start off, if you choose a schedule on the independent process from the provider's domain, you're going to see that will be like tyranny. They choose a schedule for you, they give it to you, you cannot complain about it. If we put it on the surrogate interaction on the provider's domain, you're going to see that it's a survey. We already done that. We want to enable the student to select what they want, what they prefer. If we go to the direct interaction, like Tanner said, it's going to be all the staff, all the students together trying to choose their preferred schedule. Wouldn't work. On the independent process of the student, that would not exist. And the reason why is because to choose a schedule, you need to act upon a resource. So you cannot do it independently. So the one that we chose is on the surrogate interaction. So as you can see, this is how the process would look like. You view a schedule online, you choose your schedule online, and you receive your schedule. So that would look like a class registration, but instead of a class registration, it would be intramural registration.
Alright, so now that we've discussed what it's like to get registered for intramurals, we have to ask the question, what happens when we play the games? The games is a very important aspect of this whole process because, like Tanner said, the whole registration process is only creating value potential. The actual value realization occurs when the students play the games. So we want to discuss a little bit more about the whole process of actually playing intramural sports. We'll start with the provider's process domain. As you can see, as they come down, it's a relatively short process. They essentially just train individuals and then schedule the fields, and then they're done. They wait until game day. On the other hand, if you look at the customer's process domain, you can see that there's a lot of different steps that they need to do to be able to actually play sports. And if a student fails in any one of these steps on their process domain, then they won't actually be able to play sports and they will not receive that value realization. So we just wanted to highlight a few of the possible pitfalls and places where students can fail just in red. As you can see, some of them are registering players. If you don't have players, you can't really play. They need to be there. And shaving, all that kind of stuff. If you don't shave, you can't play. So we want to talk a little bit about the value proposition for both scheduled buyers and for other players. So when a student tries to buy a schedule, he goes through this whole process of registration that we've already discussed. He comes out with a headache, and then game day comes, and he has to jump through all these hoops to try and be able to play. And if he successfully does that, then they get to play. The only issue with this is that each team is also dependent upon another team to be able to do that. If either one of these teams fails in one of those steps that we highlighted in red on the previous slide, there is no value realization. And since the student has invested so much of their own personal resources into this process, if anything fails, there's actually negative value created. The student leaves worse off than when he started. So we also want to discuss independent players. And independent players are a little bit different. They start out with the dream of they want to play sports, and they have kind of one of two options. They can either overcome their social anxieties and approach a group of people playing and say, I want to play with you, strike a deal, and then they're allowed to play. Or they can be one of the lucky few, the golden ticket players, who is asked by another team if they want to play. In either case, both of these situations are fairly hard on the independent players, and it's hard for them to find a team to play with. So this becomes unobtainable value because it's very difficult for them to receive that value. So we want to change a few things. Our suggested steps is to enable independent players so that they can actually play. And we're going to do this by creating a new process that servitizes the current process. And this will in turn relieve scheduled buyers because there will be less forfeits and it will just create a lot more value for each individual. Brock's going to talk a little bit more about that.
So in enabling our independent players, that first thing that Rob talked about, we can explore a couple of options. Basically, the most difficult part of playing as an independent player is finding a team to play on. And there's a couple places that can happen if we are creating a new process for these people. And to start, we can look at a couple options for assigning independent players to teams, and one would be in the customer's process domain here, but as you can see, that doesn't really make sense because it's likely to fail because, there's nothing to act upon. There's no resources there. And in the provider's process domain, if they don't have anything to work with, they also can't assign people to teams, and customers are their resource. So neither of those are very feasible options for assigning independent players to teams. So if we look and we put it in the customer's surrogate domain, we see that it's similar to the current system. It's more responsibility for the customer. They lack expertise, they're likely to fail, but on the plus side, it lessens the work for the intramural office. You get higher customization in theory because if this customer does find someone who wants them to play on their team, it's possible that it will be the team that they wanted to play on all along. We can move into direct interaction. We could have players go to the field, and on game night, the officials could split them up and divide them into teams, but this just did not seem like a good option because it's terribly inefficient. It impedes value realization because more time and resources are spent on game day doing managerial stuff, distributing players, and it's also difficult to manage expectations when everyone's there. So it would result in negative value and decreased perceived quality by everyone playing intramural sports. The last option is to have assigning players to teams in the provider surrogate domain. And as we look at that, we see that it requires change from the intramural office. It's not something they've done before, and it would imply more work, but it's also great because it lets them take advantage of economies of scale, lets them control the expectations, and it can lead to perceived increased quality and value. So this is kind of the process we came up with those steps, matching independent players to teams in the provider's process domain. As you can see here, this starts in the same spot as it did before. Students have a desire to play sports, they go get some information, they find out they can register as an independent player, and then they do. And the intramural office handles everything from there by making the schedules, forecasting game forfeits, and then matching independent players to teams. And this is where the enabling of the players happens, because when they match these players to teams, they can contact them. They receive, game details. They're able to go to the field. They're able to meet their team, check in with the official. But ultimately, and this is the key part, they're able to play sports. So you can see here, we've done the servitization. We've created this new process. We've actually enabled these people who before could not play, before had this unobtainable value, and made it possible for them to participate in intramural sports. But there's also some things in this process that impact the value realization for others, and Jacob's going to talk about that.
Exactly. So like Brock was mentioning, through this new servitized process, we're enabling these independent players to play, just creating value for those. But in deciding whether to implement this, you also have to recognize the value given to the people that were already on teams, that no longer have to go through this complicated and laborious process in order to get independent players to join on their team. So we're going to look at the step added for independent players, especially over here on the provider's process domain, these steps given to them. So let's first look at the customer side, where now they have this step to register as an independent player. This is good because it's relieving failure points for customers with teams. Before, teams would have to go through these steps of finding interested people, making sure they're all registered with their net IDs and everything. And those are failure points. If something bad happens there, then the value is realized. But now these solo players are enabled through this step that they have in their domain, where before they couldn't play, but now they're offered this opportunity and they have that chance. When we look on the provider side, there's a step now for matching independent players to teams. Again, we have those same steps where before they used to be on the customer side of finding these independent people. But now the coordination hassle of finding a team and seeing if they don't have enough players a certain day and reaching out to someone that might want to play, that hassle is all relieved, and people can be assigned automatically using these providers' economies of scale to create a better team experience. In addition to that, they're going to be contacting these players. Before, the teams on their own side would have to be finding players at the last minute, making sure they're registered before 3 p.m., informing them of the fee status. Those steps are now eliminated, and that searching and contacting hassle has been completely eliminated by the teams. So it's not just value added to these independent players, but it's value added to the people that were going through the process in the old way as well. So as a summary of this new servitized process, we recognize that it isn't perfect. This is going to require a lot of new work for the intramural office. Particularly employees are used to doing things the way they've been doing it for the past few decades or past decade, that those processes are going to change a bit, and it's going to require a lot of investment, both in training and also in developing and upkeeping a new website. But in the long run, we feel that those costs will be far outweighed by the added benefits to users. There's a lot less direct interaction between the people and the actual intramural office. And these processes are complicated. They're not divergent. Most of this, once it's developed and finalized in a good process, can be automated through the website. Or if there's interactions that are required by actual employees, they can be trained, and these things can be learned. So in summary, the value added to new independent players, as well as the value negative value believed from people already on teams far outweighs the costs in our opinion. And people can be happy. And yeah, that's our presentation.